everybody, for spending a little time with us today on the Inflation Reduction Act, energy incentives in the built environment. We've got a jam-packed agenda, so we will kind of get right into it. So, as Amy alluded to, my name is Joe Sawatsky. I'm a principal in the National Tax Office, specializing in business credits and incentives. Be joined today by two of our professional engineers, Kristen Gustafson, who directs all energy efficiency incentives, and Josh Steinmetz, who directs specifically our 179D efforts. Very quickly, here is our energy efficiency incentives team, small but growing. We're up to 17 folks fully dedicated to the endeavor, and with a number of them, you can see are new, so we don't have headshots just quite yet. But this is a group that was started 2.5, almost 3 years ago now. And it was a situation, if you build it, they will come. And we're excited to talk about things that are going to happen in the future. Very quickly, this is the only sales pitch of the talk, I promise. Not scientifically verified, but I think we can say with a high degree of confidence that Eide is possibly the #1 accounting firm in this energy incentive space, energy efficiency incentive space. A quick backstory, years ago, Eide would outsource a number of these energy efficiency related incentives, specifically 179D and 45L. And 2-3 years ago, as I mentioned, the partnership, to its credit, said, gosh, these are tax products, right? Deductions and credits in the built environment. They require some different expertise, professional engineering expertise, energy modeling, and the like. But at the end of the day, these numbers go on tax returns. So we, Eide, should probably have a good handle on exactly what it is we're putting in the returns. So to their credit, we made the investment to hire folks like Josh and Kristen and the other 15 folks that we saw on the previous slide to bring these energy incentives in-house. And we now have the ability to do 45L, 179D, Energy Star, you name it. We do this all now in-house. I think we'll see a number of other accounting firms jumping into the space, courtesy of Inflation Reduction. But the good news here is we've got an amazingly wonderful team, and can serve you and your clients well. So here are the fixed asset services topics for today. You can see that, as I mentioned, a jam-packed agenda. I'm going to do a quick introduction, then Josh is going to walk us through some 179D related provisions. I'll talk briefly about Section 48 credits and the EDAP program. Then we'll turn it over to Kristen to talk a little bit more on the residential side, the 45L tax credit, as well as Energy Star certifications. And if we have time, do some question and answer. So I'd ask if anything pops up, feel free, please, as Amy mentioned, use that question and answer feature there, and time permitting, towards the end of the call, we will address some of those questions. And if we run out of time, obviously more than happy to circle back around individually and make sure we get your questions answered. So there's a lot going on this first slide here, or on this slide here, the new climate economy. So there's been unprecedented governmental funding around sustainability and climate matters. Right? So we've got the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and most recently the Inflation Reduction Act, which we'll talk about today. And with all of these incentives, I think it's clear to say that the United States is making a concerted effort to tackle some of these climate-related items. And we'll see how it turns out, but I think we can all agree, or I think based on what we see here, there's certainly an effort being made. And so specifically on the Inflation Reduction Act, there's a number of climate provisions. As far as I can tell, the Inflation Reduction Act has very little to do with either inflation or reduction of said inflation. It's more or less a branded energy bill, energy incentives bill. And so the CBO, when they went through and did the math on this, said, hey, we think that this is going to cost about $374 billion over the next 10 years. The incentives we'll talk about here in a second. Credit Suisse did its own assessment and said, gosh, CBO, that is low. We think it's a little bit closer to $800 billion. And so obviously when governmental spending often acts as a catalyst for investment in the private sector. Based on the best estimates by Credit Suisse and others, we think that there could be as high as $1.4 trillion of energy efficiency incentives over the next 10 years. And so we really think it's going to move the needle, both hopefully for the climate economy, as well as to create incentives for our clients. And that's a great dovetail, because we see in recent years this whole ESG, environmental, social, and governance programs coming online and really becoming more and more popular. The purpose over profit type of thing. In these climate bills, we're going to focus mostly on the environmental and social nature of the programs. And so really, kind of for the first time, or certainly more enhanced than ever before, is this an opportunity for organizations, pretty much of all sizes, to kind of come together. And so leadership might say, hey, gosh, we've got these ESG goals that we're trying to meet over the next number of years. And then with the incentives that we saw and will see over the next 50 so minutes, it's an opportunity for leadership to work with finance, to work with the construction facilities team, and the sustainability folks, to really come together and work as a piece of unit to implement these energy efficiency savings. And we think we're really going to move the needle, like I mentioned. So, courtesy of the IRA, we now have 10 years of certainty, right? So it gives us the ability, and our clients the ability, to plan for the future, right? I call it doing things on purpose. So it's just similar to in the past, 179D and most recently 45L are typically one of these extender bills or laws whereby they would come on for 2 or 3 years, and then they would sunset, and then Congress would get their act together and renew these provisions, sometimes retroactively. So it made it very, very challenging for facilities and builders and the like to plan for what's going to happen in the future as it pertains to these incentives, because we couldn't say definitively if they were going to be around next year, or if they were, in what form they'd be. So now we have at least 10 years of certainty, courtesy of the IRA, through 2032, and those are the changes, courtesy of the IRA, is really where we're going to focus on today. In addition to the 10 years of certainty, we also have 10 years of materiality. We saw the slide before, $800 billion of potential investment. Kristen and Josh will go into these more deeply, but the 179D deduction goes up by over 2.5 times. And the 45L incentive also goes up as high as 2.5 times as well. And so in the past, an objection or a comment that we've heard from a number of organizations, especially as we get kind of larger of the food chain, is, gosh, these incentives are great, but they really don't move the needle for us, aren't really material to our bottom line. So oftentimes we pass. And based on the conversations I've been having since the passage of the IRA back in mid to late August, I think that has been a paradigm shift, whereby, gosh, $1.80 doesn't do it, but $5 might. And so I think the certainty over the next 10 years, as well as the increased incentive amounts, I think will really be interesting for you and your clients. So the two areas we're going to focus on most heavily is the 179D buildings deduction, as well as the 45L new energy efficiency home credit. We'll kick it off, and I'll turn it over to Josh Steinmetz, our director of 179D, professional engineer, licensed in more states than not, and has done, I want to say, certainly 4 digits, certainly in the thousands of site visits and field inspections as it pertains to the energy efficiency incentives. And to say he knows what he's doing is an understatement, to say the least. So with that, I'll turn it over to Josh to talk a little bit 179D.
Thanks, Joe. And yeah, I've seen a lot of boilers in my day. So thanks for everybody. Thanks for tuning in and joining us for this presentation. I'm here to talk about Section 179D, which is, in legislative speak, the energy efficient commercial building property tax deduction. So we'll start with just a quick background on how the deduction works. The deduction was enacted to encourage commercial building owners to install energy efficient systems in their facilities. This deduction applies not only to new construction, but also to renovations and additions and improvements. And it applies to commercial and governmental, and also going forward, nonprofit facilities as well. So the energy efficient commercial building property is denoted to take part of one of three systems, one being HVAC, so heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And that also includes hot water systems as well. The second system is interior lighting, and that also includes any controls such as motion sensors or daylighting sensors that turn the lights off when they're not being used or not necessary. And the third is the building envelope. The envelope, think of it as just the shell of the building. That would be walls, roofs, windows, doors, and any of the insulating materials that kind of go with that assembly. So to complete a 179D study, information from the facility is gathered from building drawings, building specifications, and plans and things like that. And also a site visit is required to ensure that the energy efficient property is installed as denoted on those plans. And from there, a commercial energy or a computer energy model is built using government approved energy modeling software. And this model compares the elements and the performance of the building, the actual building that's a candidate for the deduction, to a virtual reference building. And that is modeled based on ASHRAE standard 90.1. What is that? ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And they developed what amounts to an energy code. It's referred to as standard 90.1. And the purpose of this energy code is to provide the minimum requirements that are needed for an energy efficient design of commercial buildings. So the reference building is based on those minimum requirements. And to achieve a full deduction, the actual building with the energy efficient property that is installed needs to demonstrate a 50% energy savings relative to that reference building. Finally, these results are certified by a qualified individual, such as a professional engineer, and those are submitted as part of the tax return. That's the technical background, and it's just that, it's background. There's no need to remember all that. We take care of the technical side of things. We have energy modelers, we perform the site visit, the engineering, and the certification. So with that said, the summary is that the Inflation Reduction Act has, as Joe mentioned, raised the ceiling for what this deduction can be per square foot from $1.80, actually $1.88. They gave us a little bit of a cost of living adjustment the last 2 years, up to $5 potentially per square foot, and that is significant. Prior to it, it was $1.88 per square foot up to 2020. When the Appropriations Act at the end of 2020 came in, they did give it a bump to $1.82 for buildings placed in service in 2021 and $1.88 for buildings placed in service in 2022. Those three systems that I talked about, lighting, HVAC, and building envelope, are the three systems that we look at when we consider this the eligibility for this deduction. Also, there was a lifetime cap, and what that means is each building could only qualify for this deduction once in its lifetime. So once they did it, that was it, and it was over. As Joe mentioned, also it was started 2006, every couple of years renewed, and it's finally been made permanent. And this deduction can be realized by both private owners of buildings, but also designers of government buildings that are tax exempt and therefore not eligible for a tax deduction. And that's how things have been up to this point. The significant changes going forward, starting in 2023, are that you kind of have two tiers of deduction. There's the base deduction, which ranges from 50 cents to $1 per square foot. And then you have a bonus deduction that ranges from $2.50 to $5 per square foot. Now, those amounts are based on a few rules for which we have just recently gotten guidance, and Joe will touch on a little bit later in this presentation. But they revolve around prevailing wage requirements and apprenticeship requirements. So it is about the labor that is performing the work. Still dealing with lighting, HVAC, and building envelope. And one of the significant changes is it is now subject to a 3-year cap for this 179D deduction. And what that means is if you take that deduction 3 years later, if you have a significant renovation, because this does apply to new construction and renovations, if you have a significant renovation that includes one of those 3 building systems, you can qualify for that deduction again. So that makes it that makes it a really good incentive when you do improve your building to do it in an energy efficient manner. The other thing, another addition is that real estate investment trusts are also eligible for this. That kind of widens the potential recipients of this deduction. And also it does apply to private owners and designers of government buildings, but also it adds a few other classes of building. It includes Indian tribal facilities and also certain tax exempt entities, including houses of worship, charity buildings, and also nonprofit hospitals. So if it's a non-tax paying entity, designers can be eligible to realize the deductions from those buildings. So after the first of the year, the way that the deductions are going to play out is a little bit different from what it was before. It was more of an all or nothing kind of binary type of situation before. Either you met the threshold or you didn't. The deductions going forward are kind of on a sliding scale. So the minimum is you have to save 25% in energy over the ASHRAE 90.1 standard baseline, and that gives you half of the possible deduction. As you go up, each percentage point, your potential deduction ticks up as well, all the way up to a maximum of 50% savings, which gives you that $1 base deduction up to a $5 bonus deduction, as it mentions on the slide. That is with the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. As mentioned, the deduction can be allocated to 2 different types of entities. If you're a private owner of a building, then you can qualify for this deduction, and you can take this deduction even if the improvements or the original construction of the building goes all the way back to 2006. The other thing too is it doesn't just apply to owners. If you're a tenant who leases a large building and has made significant improvements on your own, if you have paid for those improvements, you could be eligible for that deduction as well. The other side of it is mentioned with the non-tax paying entities like governmental buildings and school buildings and things like that. That deduction can be allocated to designers of those buildings. And the designer is kind of specifically referred to in the language. It's a person who creates the technical specifications for the installation of the energy efficient systems in the building. So it's important to note that the designer creates those specifications and or drawings and is not just installing, repairing, or maintaining it. So they did have to have some say in the selection of the equipment and the design of the equipment. For those designers, you can't go all the way back to 2006. You can only do open tax years, which for us right now is going back to 2019. And this is a situation where the entity itself, the governmental entity or the school district or whoever is in charge of those buildings, assigns or allocates that deduction to the designers of that building. Here's a kind of an example of that allocation letter. This is required for the deduction to be given to the designer of the building, and the entity itself, say the school district or the local government, actually assigns this out. And this is done, honestly, it's done kind of on a first come, first served basis. So if there is an architect involved or an engineer involved, it usually goes to whomever submits the request for the allocation first. And a lot of times architects and engineers work together to kind of make sure that they both get part of that allocation. So this is something that is required for any governmental or nonprofit organization. That deduction has to be allocated by the owner to the designer. So we'll go through a few case studies here, I think, to kind of show the variety of situations and the variety of buildings that this deduction applies to. For this one here, it's a manufacturing facility in Minneapolis, large facility, 600,000+ square feet. Some of the things they did, it's a renovation, so it's not new construction. So they did some lighting and HVAC renovations. The gas-fired 95 AFUI, that's annual fuel utilization efficiency. And all that means is that the systems installed convert 95% of the fuel into heat. So there's very little waste, it's very efficient. And in a heating dominant environment such as Minneapolis, that's important, that you want your efficiency to be in the equipment that's used the most and consumes the most energy. Cooling, also efficient too, 13 SEER, that's seasonal energy efficiency ratio. The higher the better on that. And then obviously LED fixtures are are kind of the standard now, the more efficient fixtures that have been upgrades from the fluorescent lighting. Occupancy sensors turn off the lights when they're not being used. So these all contribute to the energy efficiency of the building model. So as you can see with the $1.80 deduction, that's a $1.1 million deduction for the owner of that building. This is a new construction facility in Phoenix, distribution center, also very large, nearly 700,000 square feet. The heating system, only 80% efficient, which is kind of a standard number, but in Phoenix, you don't need a whole lot of heat. The bigger issue is cooling, and you can see that's an even more efficient system than what they installed at the facility in Minneapolis. Same thing with LED and occupancy sensors on the lighting side. So that qualifies for $1.80 per square foot. That's $1.25 million deduction there. And that's for the private business owner. As you move on here, this is a situation where a deduction was allocated to a designer. It's an elementary school, and they only did HVAC. They didn't do any lighting. However, the HVAC system performed so well that it qualified the entire building for a deduction. So in this case, nearly 200,000 square foot building results in a $350,000 deduction for that designer. And this would be a new construction facility, fine arts center. This one includes building envelope and lighting. So you've got some efficient insulation in the roof and walls, really high performance windows, and the lighting also. 80,000 square feet roughly, and results in 143,692. So that's a nice deduction as well. And then multifamily, up until this point, residential buildings qualified for 179D if they're greater than 3 stories tall. Those are considered high-rise buildings, 3 stories and lower, low-rise. Kristen will talk kind of more about what the current stipulations are with 45L going forward. But for 179D, for this high-rise building, highly efficient furnaces, very efficient cooling, and very efficient lighting. And this results in an entire apartment building netting about $647,000 in a deduction. So also very lucrative there. I think that just kind of illustrates the breadth of different buildings and different possibilities for this 179D deduction. It can be new buildings, renovations. It could be privately held. It can be non-tax paying entities. It's just kind of, it's just a really versatile deduction here. And then one other thing that is really useful too, and that we like to do, is if you are a designer of those non-tax paying entities, you can kind of get an idea if you can provide a list of those buildings, those types of buildings that you perform, and we can kind of run down a list of all those possibilities that you can do here. And you can see, like, I mean, this is pretty small. I don't know if you can read it real well on your screen, but say there's an elementary school, 115,000 square feet, you get that full deduction, and that's a $209,000 deduction. You multiply that by your tax rate, and that's real savings of $73,000. And as you go on down, you get this a high school here, and you move farther down, you got an event center, it's 150,000 square feet. This hospital here, 88,000 square feet, you can see this is kind of a future project because it's got that deduction all the way up at $4.20. But as you go through here, you get these deductions, multiply it by your tax rate. You know, long story short, this portfolio of examples here leads you to a total tax savings, not your deductions, 3.2 million, but your actual tax savings based on your tax rate, $1,149,000. So it's a really versatile and really rewarding deduction that you can take advantage of there. Way you claim it is if you are a designer, In the current year, you just find, in this case for the S Corp form, it's like line 19, I think. Yeah, 19 other deductions, and add the attachment and report that we provide. Prior years, you do have to amend your returns. And the reason for that is a taxpayer claiming the deduction as a designer has to file that return, because the systems that were placed in service, there's no method of accounting for that building, because it's the entity versus the designer, and therefore that person is that designer can't depreciate the property. So with that in mind, you do have to amend the return. If it's a privately owned building, current year, same thing. You do the other deductions with the attachment, and in the prior year, you're able to fill out a 3115 form without amending your returns. That's an accounting method change, and also do a 481A calculation. And I'll just real briefly touch on those. Yeah, 3115 accounting method change. That allows you to take the deduction in the current year without amending the returns, and that goes all the way back to 2006. And then the section 481A adjustment is just because you've been, if you're a private owner, you've been depreciating some of that property over the years. So if it is a few years old, you've got some depreciation already baked in. This reduces the 179D deduction, so you don't take the same deduction twice. So in summary, you're looking at up to a $5 deduction per square foot on these buildings, thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act. Privately owned buildings, anything from 2006 on. For designers of non-tax-paying buildings, non-tax-paying entities, those buildings have to have been placed in service in an open tax year. That's 2019 going forward. And the not-for-profit, we have a 10-year runway on that from 2023 to 2032. The buildings of 25,000 square feet, that's not a hard and fast rule, but it generally yields a better benefit in terms of kind of a cost analysis there, with this being a square footage basis deduction. And I'll also touch briefly, that's the traditional 179D deduction. There's also another alternative deduction under the same section that has been introduced with the Inflation Reduction Act, and that is the energy efficient retrofit. The difference is that standard 179D, this is kind of an after the fact. You do the work, you get a deduction after that work's performed based on an analysis of what's been done there. This is kind of a preemptive deduction, and it involves filling out a qualified retrofit plan. This is a plan that you consult with a qualified professional, such as a professional engineer or a registered architect, and you specify modifications to the building in terms of what kind of HVAC are you going to put in, what kind of lighting are you going to put in, are you going to change out windows? And by creating this detailed plan, if the plan is expected to reduce the energy usage by 25% up to 50%, then you can qualify for the deduction in that way as well. Again, this does require some kind of advanced planning. So if it is a renovation that you're looking to undertake, it's good to kind of get out in front of that, just to make sure that you are doing all the things that might allow you to take this deduction if that's a goal of yours. Similar to the traditional 179D, base deduction 50 cents to $1, bonus deduction $2.50 to $5 a square foot, again based on those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. So this will not be placed into effect until 2023. So it is a future deduction, but that's coming up really soon. And what you do is you compare that energy usage after you've renovated the building to what it was before. This also applies to private owners and designers of buildings, up to $5 a square foot. You may also qualify for partial disposition, which is kind of reclaiming some of the tax value that's remaining if you remove equipment to replace it with new equipment. And again, that qualified retrofit plan is required. So it does require consultation with a qualified individual. And I think with that, that is it. So I will stop talking and kick it back to Joe.
Fantastic, Josh. That was really good. Much appreciated. A lot of information there for sure. But And I see a bunch of great questions coming through in the Q&A, so keep those coming. Looks like we may have some time towards the end. And again, we might be able to circle around offline as well. So let me just briefly touch on the Energy Deduction Allocation Program is the working title, EDAP for short. And so Josh talked about, the Inflation Reduction Act opening up the ability for all non-taxpaying entities to assign the deduction to this designer. And in addition to that, at the top of the hour, we kind of talked about the 10 years of materiality, right? And so from $1.80 per square foot going up to as high as $5 a square foot, these numbers have become more meaningful, right? And will be continuing more meaningful for the next decade at least. So on a new construction or a renovation 179D project, there are three main players involved, right? So there's the building owner, tax exempt orgs, K through 12, senior living, YMCA, really any tax exempt entity. There's also the designer, as Josh mentioned, right? The person that creates technical specifications for the installation of the energy efficient property. And then there's the third party certifier who runs through the Department of runs the buildings to the Department of Energy approved and IRS approved software, and does the site visits and does the modeling and certifies by a qualified individual professional engineer. As an aside, we're licensed in all 50 states. I guess that's the second sales pitch I've given, so I apologize for that. And so there's three main players. And so under the new rules up to $5 a square foot, we're finding a lot of interest here for folks who are saying, boy, how do I do this? We say folks, tax exempt organizations that say, how do I do this? How do I administer this? How do I make sure that I'm not running afoul of any of these rules? And how do I mitigate my risk? And also potentially, if they would like to create some value for themselves in terms of monetary value from this deduction. So towards the right there, we'll see, just run through this example. This is just a very hypothetical example of a 625,000 square foot medical office campus. It'll qualify for the full $1.80 per square foot, yielding a $3.125 deduction for the designer. His or her tax rate, marginal tax rate, let's just say is 35%. And so the designer tax savings just under $1.1 million. So the fees, which are typically paid by the designer, the certification fee, that's the way it's always been. Hypothetical certification fee in this case is $187,000 to professional engineering firm or Eide or whomever to do the actual work. And then it's at the entity's sole discretion as to how they allocate this deduction. So we've seen this in the past, right, with the governmental entities who negotiate some monetary value from this deduction. And it's anything from, a reduction in the contract value, the cost of the contract to, maybe higher end finishes done at zero cost to the owner, or even a charitable contribution to their favorite whatever. It's really at their sole discretion. So in this hypothetical example, $250,000 tax exempt org allocation fee. So at the bottom, it's kind of a win-win-win for all parties involved. We still have that same savings at 1.093. And then the net benefit after the fees paid by the designer is $656,000. Again, the $250,000 exempt fee, as well as the third-party CPA and private professional engineering certification fee is $187,000. So that's an opportunity for you to work with your clients or clients on the own to kind of take a look at these projects and say, all right, well, what does, we're getting these new buildings with the energy efficiency savings, right? Whether it's renovation or addition or new construction, but what are some other options out there and that we might be able to monetize or take advantage of? And this EDAP is just one part of a number of other provisions, primarily under Section 48, which I'll talk about in a second. But just something to keep in mind, and something that we're seeing just exploding in interest from our client base and others. And I think the two main catalysts is number one, again, $5 from $1.80 or $1.88 index to inflation, that materiality we talked about, and then the non-tax-paying entities, right? You might be a non-tax-paying entity, but at the end of the day, really, we're still looking to generate revenue and generate value for. So I'll run through very quickly how we doing on time. A little bit behind. This is perfect. I'll run through a couple items that have changed in section 6417 specific to the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're going to go through these relatively quite quickly. We could spend an hour probably on each of them, but I just want to make you aware as you have projects coming online or seeing things happening. And so really this pertains to any projects that are placed in service after New Year's of this year. All right, section 48 energy credits. So here are 10 of them here, anywhere from solar to fuel cells to energy storage, microgrid stuff, and the like. And you can see that the credit amounts, as an example for a solar project, can be substantial. We got the base credit of 6% right off the top, and then Josh mentioned the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements. And you'll see that through the IRA in a number of provisions, not just with solar, not just with 179D or 45L, but really anything in there is you've got a base credit of X, and then if you meet these prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, it's 5X, right? So that's just something to keep in mind, and we'll talk about more about that in a second. But so we've got the 30% of the cost, assuming the wage rules are met. There's another 10% domestic content, another 10% if you're in an energy community, brownfields, close to closed coal fire plants and the like. And then there's an additional for solar around environmental justice allocation. So if you kind of put the math together, you're kind of thinking, boy, should we look at solar for our, in this case, solar for our facility? If you kind of add those up, it could be a situation whereby, you know, more than half of the project's costs can be covered through these tax credits. So the $64,000 question is, what do we have to do to meet the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements? Couple things there to note. So number one, in almost all of the provisions in the IRA, there's a 60-day safe harbor, meaning if you've begun construction prior to any guidance being issued, you can see there the initial guidance was issued last week on November 29th. So if you have started any project that's begun, you know, within 60 days or 60 days before, really the easier way to say it is the end of January. If you start construction before the end of January, there are very specific rules around that in terms of physical work being of a substantial nature being or have begun or incurred 5% of the project cost. You know, you would fall under the safe harbor, right? With the understanding that, hey, gosh, I broke ground on a project in June of 2022. I wasn't aware of these labor requirements, so how could I adhere to them? So you're going to operate under a safe harbor. So notice 2022-61 gives us the first kind of guidance as to what we're looking for or what we need to do in order to meet these labor and apprenticeship requirements. Just my opinion, I think the opinion of others, is this guidance was issued maybe a little bit hastily and is ambiguous and slightly vague, I think almost by design. And really, I think what they wanted to do is just to get this 60-day clock ticking, so that way we don't have a safe harbor for the next 3 years until they get together. So there's more information to come from our NTO. I think we've had some communications going out around that, and as additional guidance becomes available, we certainly let you know. But at the end of the day, in order to claim the 5X bonus credit and all of these things, we're looking for a prevailing wage apprenticeship. Again, more details will be coming around claiming the credits and what the requirements are. So left this slide in there just as a quick little aside for a talk coming up on the 14th of December around individual considerations. Jenny McGarry and Joe Christine will be talking more about all of these things around clean cars and individual incentives. Please tune in to that if you have the time and inclination. And then there are a number of other provisions that are available for direct pay to both, tax exempt as well as for-profit entities. I won't read through them there, but just see that included in that $800 billion, there's quite a little bit going on for sure. So with that, with our final little bit of time here, I will turn it over to Mrs. Kristen Gustafson, also a professional engineer. She runs our energy incentives, efficiency incentives program. Professional engineer licensed everywhere you can be licensed, consultant for NREL, president of the American Society of efficient engineers, something, an all around good person. So he's going to walk us through the 45L tax credit as it pertains to the IRA as well as invest. Kristen?
Thank you, Joe. So I'm going to be giving you an overview of 45L, New Energy Efficient Home Credit. So this is a program very similar to 179D. This tax credit was designed to encourage and incentivize home builders to build energy efficient homes. So let's walk through what that looks like. Hopefully my slides are, there we go, perfect. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the IRA has impacted this tax credit. So starting with what it looked like prior to the IRA, there on the left side of your screen. So as mentioned, this credit was originally an extender, and it had originally expired at the end of 2021. So it applies to projects sold or leased in an open tax year, which is typically 2019 through the present. And it applies to both single-family homes, manufactured homes, and multifamily projects 3 stories or less at those credit amounts you see here. $1,000 per manufactured home and $2,000 per unit for single-family and multifamily homes. So looking on the right here, how things have changed with the IRA. So the IRA extended that previously expired credit through the end of this year. So for all projects that qualify sold or leased through the end of 2022, all of the old rules apply. So that $2,000 credit for single family and multifamily up to 3 stories. The new rules starting January 1st, 2023 and apply through the end of 2032. So we now have that 10-year extension of this credit. A couple key things have changed. First of all, we're no longer capped by the number of stories. So the sky is literally the limit for these multifamily projects. Those residential tower projects and high rises we see popping up all over, those can now be included. Also new, there's no basis reduction for affordable housing projects. So where projects where the low income housing tax credit applies, we don't need to worry about the basis reduction there. And as far as the incentive amounts go, there are now a few tiers of those credits, which I will detail in the next slide. There we go. So the credit rates vary based on a number of factors. So working through them, starting with single family homes, the credit is increasing to $2,500 per unit for homes which meet the Energy Star standards listed here. The same credit of $2,500 also applies to the manufactured homes. And then for projects which are zero energy ready, assuming they follow all the requirements of the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Home Program, that rate increases to $5,000 per unit. Then on the multifamily side, the credit starts at a base rate of $500 a unit with a bonus rate of $2,500 available for projects where the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements are met that Joe spoke about a little bit earlier. So this is an either or situation. You either get the base rate or the bonus rate, but not both. And then those credit rates increase for projects which meet the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home multifamily program. So for multifamily units, the base credit is $1,000 per unit with a bonus credit of $5,000 per unit if those requirements around a wage and apprenticeship are met. What else is new? So as we mentioned, for affordable housing projects, the 45L credit can now be applied without reducing that low-income house tax credit basis. So that means for these properties that don't have the excess basis, you can now stack the 45L credit. So in prior years, eligible projects might have shied away from pursuing the credit. And also good to note, with the 10-year extension, we have a longer runway for folks to plan for these credits. And then, as also mentioned earlier, the sky's the limit. The 3-story limit no longer applying for projects first occupied after January 1st, 2023. So this means that developers of high-rise developments can potentially be recouping some of those costs typically associated with building energy efficient type residences. And then the side benefit, the tenants or owners of these units will also benefit through lower energy costs and fewer greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm going to walk through a couple of quick case studies here to illustrate just some of the features that we're seeing in eligible projects. So the first one here being a home development in Nevada. And some of the features of this complex included an insulated slab construction, high-performing windows there with a U value of 0.5, sensible heat gain coefficient of 0.27. And then on the HVAC side is a heat pump installation, which tend to be more efficient performers. And then included in the design were Energy Star appliances and LED lighting throughout. So as a result, of all the homes that passed and were sold, resulted in $170,000 worth of credits to the developer. Another single-family complex, this one in Oklahoma. Some of the features included a highly insulated roof and ceiling construction, again, those good performing windows, and then on the heating side, a high performing 95 AFU furnace unit, again, higher number the better, cooling 14 SEER split system. As a result, 100% of those homes passed and were sold in an open tax year, resulting in $222,000 worth of credits. Next example here, this is a multifamily complex, and this would have been less than 3 stories. It's a prior project. So it's a 56-unit townhome complex in Minnesota, so heating dominated climate. Some of the features here, again, a highly insulated wall and roof construction, good performing windows, and then along with that efficient heating system, we've got ductwork insulation to R8 throughout the complex. So as a result, all of those units qualified and released, resulting in $112,000 worth of credits to the home developer. So hopefully enough examples here to show there's a number of factors that go into qualifying a project. And we'll talk a little bit more about what the qualification process looks like here in the next few slides. So for 45L prior to the IRA, so before January 1st of 23, the energy use of the proposed home must be 50% below a reference unit built to the 2006 IECC standards, and envelope improvements, meaning the wall, the roof, and the window performance, those must account for at least a fifth or 20% of those reductions. So going forward, to receive the 45L credit, the projects must be eligible for Energy Star certification, and that means that they meet the energy and construction requirements that are set forth by Energy Star. And this process and these requirements really vary highly dependent on the location and the climate zone of the project. Unfortunately, there's no hard and fast rules for what projects will or won't qualify. But we know that projects that may have deficiencies in one area, for example, less insulation on the roof, they can make up for that by overperforming in a different area, like higher efficiency heating and cooling systems, or the addition of an insulated glazing system. So to kind of assist in that process, we've put together a targeted efficiency sheet that lists out minimum qualifications we look for in potential 45L projects. And again, this is highly dependent on the climate zone and the applicable building code for the project location. We can create these very quickly. They're great conversation starters for residential developers that might have an interest in pursuing the credit. We will also do provisional assessments for sample home or apartment types if we can get a copy of a typical plan and spec for the project, including the mechanical equipment, which tends to be the driver of energy efficiency, and we'll do those free of charge. The bar for qualification for 45L is quite high, as I mentioned. So in the event that a project will not qualify, we'll put together a non-qualification memo, which kind of lists out some potential energy upgrades for consideration for future projects, which may help the qualification chances. All right, the certification process. The process starts on our end with a thorough review of the drawings and specifications of each unit, along with a detailed analysis of the unit geometry, orientation, and the construction details. The energy simulation modeling is done using IRS-approved software. Some options include REM rate, which you see here, that little snippet, along with Ecotrope, Energy Gauge, MicroPass. There are a number of accredited tools out there. This list is being updated all the time. But the certification must be done by a person accredited by ResNet or an equivalent. So here at Eide Bailly, we do have those folks on staff. Implementing the credit into tax. You use Form 8908. This is the energy efficient home credit. It's fairly simple math. The number of homes times the credit amount is entered on the form here. And the credit is used against your regular tax liability, and it is not a cash refund. However, this credit can be carried forward 20 years. So if a developer can't use the credit in any given year, it can be carried forward. On current year studies, it's very straightforward. Like Josh explained, it's done on a current return. But for prior year studies in all open tax years, amended returns are required. The year that the unit is first sold or leased is the applicable tax year for each study. Some takeaways or beacons for 45L. That credit amount varies pretty dramatically based on the applicable program and the home type, but it's $500 up to $5,000 credit per qualifying unit. We're looking at residential single-family homes and multifamily homes, 3 stories and less through the end of this year, 22, and then after January 1st, through the end of 2032, all residential properties will be a potential candidate. This applies to projects sold or leased in an open tax year. And then from our end, we tend to look for developments greater in size than 10 units. Again, not a requirement, just tends to yield a better benefit for all parties. And then the first step is a discovery call and a provisional assessment. So we're happy to answer any questions in the chat on that. Otherwise, we'll talk a little bit about some pairings of energy efficiency. It's important to remember that all these energy efficiency studies, the 179D that Josh talked through, as well as these 45L studies, they pair very nicely with a cost segregation study when the project is newly constructed or has undergone a major renovation, including hopefully a renovation to one of those systems impacting energy performance, the HVAC, the lighting, or the envelope. Projects placed in service on or after January 1st, 2006, as far as 179D and cost seg, and then the owner plans to hold on to the property for at least 3 years. So starting in 2023, the 179D deduction and 45L credit can be stacked along with the cost segregation study for these multifamily projects. So you get a win everywhere you look. It's a triple play there. All right, the last topic I'll cover here, Energy Star certification for buildings. We've seen an increasing interest from our clients in certifying their buildings as energy efficient, and one path to doing that is through Energy Star. So this is a certification run jointly by the EPA and the Department of Energy, and that Energy Star label is one of the most widely recognized symbols of energy efficiency by consumers. You're probably familiar with the logo, seeing it on home goods like televisions, refrigerators, and the like, but it also applies to buildings based on how much energy they consume compared to their peers, and that's done through an analysis of operational energy usage of the property. So the Department of Energy has collected some data around Energy Star certified buildings. So why would you consider Energy Star? According to the DOE, 7 to 8% higher rental rates, 10 to 11% higher occupancy rates for rented or leased properties, and a 6 to 10% premium on sales prices when the property goes to market. And then additionally, commercial building landlords that intend to lease to federal tenants, they're required by the GSA to be Energy Star certified. Another important note here, preferred financing is available to Energy Star certified properties, particularly homes, including mortgage insurance premium reductions. So that MIP program is run by the Housing and Urban Development Authority and reduces the mortgage insurance premiums required by some lending providers, which can be really key in sourcing funding for those kinds of construction projects. And then some other reasons why building owners choose to pursue Energy Star certification include improved employee recruitment and retention rates, or simply because being green is an asset to your corporate image and useful for any ESG reporting that companies may be subject to. So So what information do we need for Energy Star certifications? So building owners need to collect some data about the property, starting with the function, the address, the year of construction. The property usage details are required, including operating hours, number of staff, and then the energy usage data. We'll need to collect the utility bills for all energy sources, including electricity and gas. So for apartment owners or for buildings with individually metered tenants, you need to get a plan in place to collect that utility data, it's highly dependent on your utility provider how easy that is. Also important to note, 12 months of utility data is needed for that certification. So the building needs to be operating for a full year before the certification can be obtained. The benefit of doing these Energy Star certifications in conjunction with cost segregation or 179D is that a site visit's also required. So we just want to confirm that the building is operating in a way that's both energy efficient, but also beneficial to the occupants. So we won't go through all those there, but we just want to make sure that there's sufficient outdoor air, the environment's comfortable, and that light levels are sufficient for tasks taking place in the building. So a quick case study before we wrap things up. This is a multifamily development of 3 4-story apartment buildings and a clubhouse facility in South Dakota. So Eide Bailey conducted a cost segregation and 179D study along with an Energy Star certification in order to help the owner obtain that MIP reduction. So some of the building highlights, highly efficient gas-fired heating, 15 SEER cooling, LED lighting. The buildings were designed to earn Energy Star, meaning that the design met that Energy Star requirements. And then the end result of this study was a deduction of $500,000 from the study, $2.7 million net depreciation from the cost segregation study, and then the Energy Star certification, enabling that MIP reduction, which will save hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life of the loan.